My name is Nora Bramwell, and I was 34 the week I found out what my own family thought a funeral was worth. My husband Ethan had been dead for 4 days. Every single relative I had skipped his service to eat cake at my brother's 45th birthday party. 3 people signed the guest book that afternoon. 3. While they were belting out happy birthday across town, I stood in a chapel and watched a casket sink into the ground at 7 minutes past 2. They told themselves it was just one lost Saturday. They told themselves Ethan wouldn't know the difference. 2 weeks later, my attorney dropped a letter in each of their mailboxes. It started with 5 words, per the estate of Ethan. Let me tell you about the day my family picked a party over a goodbye. I count things for a living. I'm a forensic accountant, which is a fancy way of saying I dig through spreadsheets until I find the lie hiding in them. The $1 that quietly walked out the door when nobody was watching. People hear that and assume I'm cold. Ethan always said it just meant I told the truth for a paycheck. We'd been married 11 years, together a bit longer than that, in a little brick place on Ashwood Street here in Millbrook, Georgia. He was the steady one. I kept other people's books balanced. He kept ours balanced, and he did it without ever making a show of it, the way some men fix a sagging gate before you even notice it's crooked. My family never paid much attention to Ethan. The Bramwells were close the way a clenched fist is close. Tight, but only around themselves. My mother, Marlene, ran the whole clan like she was chairing a church board. My brother Trevor was the golden boy everybody circled around. And me, I was the one who answered the phone. Flat tire at midnight, overdraft the week before payday, a leaky roof and no cash to fix it. That call always came to me and I never once complained. You don't complain when it's people you love. What I should have done was count how many of them ever called just to ask how I was doing. That number would have told me something plain. Ethan already knew the number. He never said it out loud, but toward the end he started saying other things. Little things. He'd hold my hand and warn me to watch out for people who only remembered I existed when something broke. I figured it was the medication talking. I'd kiss his forehead and steer the conversation somewhere else, because there was always a chart to read or a pill to crush or a window that needed cracking open. I had no idea how much thought he'd put into all of it until it was way too late to say thank you. The cancer took 16 months to take him. Pancreatic, already stage 3 by the time anyone caught it, and you learn fast that those odds don't soften for anybody. I cut my client load in half. I taught myself how to flush a port, how to read a morphine schedule, how to sleep sitting up in a hard chair without tipping onto the floor. My family learned none of that. My mother called maybe twice a month, and never once about him. She'd ask if I'd seen Trevor's new truck, whether I was coming to Easter, whether I'd spoken to the pastor lately. Ethan would be 3 feet away, gray and wasting down to nothing, and she'd want to talk about the pastor. One night I had her on speaker while I changed his sheets. She didn't realize I could still hear her when she turned to my Aunt Diane and said, low and sure of herself, "We're your real family, Nora, not him." Ethan heard it too. He just shut his eyes and let me think he'd missed it, because that was easier on me than watching my face fall. That was the spring he started going to appointments alone. He'd tell me they were follow-ups, routine scans, nothing worth dragging me along for. He'd come home worn out and a little distant, and sometimes there'd be a heavy cream-colored envelope riding shotgun on the passenger seat. I asked him once if everything was all right. He gave me a tired smile and said he was just getting his affairs squared away. And a dying man saying he's getting his affairs in order is about the most ordinary sentence there is. So I believed him. Why wouldn't I? You don't audit the man you're about to lose. You hold his hand and beg the numbers to be wrong. Ethan died on a Tuesday morning with my palm flat against his chest and the radio playing low. The funeral home set the service for that Saturday at 2 o'clock. I called my mother first, the way you do. I was braced for grief, maybe a casserole showing up on my porch. Instead, Marlene went very still and then very businesslike. "Saturday's Trevor's party, honey," she said. "His 45th. We booked that hall months ago." I told her I was burying my husband. She said she understood, she truly did, and was there any chance the funeral home could push it to Sunday, or maybe the weekend after, so nobody in the family would have to pick between the two? I stood in my kitchen and felt the floor tilt sideways under me. Pick. Then Trevor got on the line, all that easy warmth he'd used his whole life to talk our parents out of ever facing a consequence. "Don't turn this into a thing, Nora," he said. "He's gone, he's not gonna know who showed up." I told him I was not going to reschedule Ethan's burial around a balloon delivery. I said it calmly. I'm always calm. It's the only weapon I've ever really trusted. There was a pause, the kind where people do quiet math in their heads. Then my mother sighed, like I was the difficult one, like my grief was just a scheduling headache I was being rude about. "We'll see what we can do," she said. In Bramwell, that means no. I hung up and looked at the calendar stuck to the fridge, at the little square with Trevor's 45th written in my mother's looping cursive, and I understood a decision had already been made in a room I hadn't been standing in. The texts dribbled in over the next 2 days, and I got to watch my whole family RSVP to a birthday instead of a burial, in real time. Aunt Diane was just so sorry, but she'd already promised to help with the cake. My uncle had something going on with his knee. 2 cousins were hauling Trevor's gift up from Savannah and just couldn't manage both stops. Not one of them flat out said no to the funeral. That's not how the Bramwells operate. They simply found themselves unavoidably busy somewhere else. All of them, same afternoon. What my mother would later call a sad little coincidence. One night I found the family group chat still open on my phone. I was still in it back then. Under all the apologies, I could see the actual planning. My mother running the show. What time's the toast? Who's grabbing tablecloths? And one line from her, sent at 9:40 the night before I put my husband in the ground. "Let's keep it light for Trevor. Nobody wants a sad day. Nobody." I read it 3 times. It's my job to read documents for what they actually say, and that one said everything I needed to know. By the morning of the service, my phone had gone dead quiet. No good luck. No, "Are you holding up okay?" Just a weather alert and a note that my prescription was ready for pickup. I got dressed in the dark so I wouldn't have to look at my own face in the mirror. Then I drove to the funeral home alone, in a black dress Ethan never got to see, to bury the one person who'd ever bothered to ask how I was and stick around for the whole answer. The chapel at Millbrook Memorial holds about 140. I counted the empty rows, because counting is what I do when the other option is screaming. There was an old truck I sort of recognized parked nose out at the back of the lot when I pulled in, but I was too hollowed out to place it, and I didn't give it a second look. 3 people came. Ethan's hospice nurse, Rosalind Pace in her good coat, sitting up straight as a fence post. Aaron Fisk, Ethan's buddy since college, who'd flown down from Michigan on 4 hours of sleep. And me. The funeral home had set a guest book out on a little brass stand by the door, cream-colored pages, a pen chained to it. By the time the service wrapped up, there were 3 lines of writing in it. 3 names on a page built to hold hundreds. I remember staring at all that empty white and thinking it looked like an accusation. The minister, who'd never once met Ethan, called him a beloved member of the community, and I didn't correct him, because clear across town a room full of my relatives was busy proving exactly how beloved a man had to be to rate one Saturday afternoon. Rosalind found me afterward, standing by the casket. She put her hand on my arm, this small woman who'd carried a stranger's husband through his worst nights, and she said, "He talked about you right up to the end, you know. The very last day." I didn't cry then. I'd done all my crying alone in hard chairs at 3 in the morning for a year and a half. I just nodded, lifted the guest book off the brass stand, and slid it into my bag. It was the only proof anybody had shown up at all, and some stubborn part of me insisted I'd want it later. I had no clue yet how right that instinct would turn out to be. That night I made a cup of tea I didn't drink and opened my phone the way you do when the house is too quiet and the bed's too big. Trevor had posted the party, 38 photos. There was the banner, gold foil, 45 and fabulous. There was the cake, 3 tiers, a sparkler fountain throwing off light. There was my entire family jammed in behind it, caught mid-laugh, my mother in the middle with her glass up and her head tipped back. They looked amazing. They looked like an ad for the kind of family I thought I had. I scrolled through it all numb until I hit the shot of the toast. And then the accountant in me did what it always does. I checked the timestamp. 2:07 p.m. I knew that number. I'd watched it tick over on the little brass clock above the casket while 4 men I'd paid lowered my husband into the earth. 2:07. My mother was raising a glass while I was staring down at dirt. I didn't cry at the photo. I screenshotted it. Old reflex. When something doesn't add up, you save the original before anyone gets a chance to edit it. I saved the image with the timestamp attached and set the phone face down on the nightstand. I told myself it didn't matter, that knowing the exact minute changed nothing. But numbers are stubborn like that. Once you've seen them, you can't unsee them, and 2:07 moved into my house that night like a tenant who was never going to pay a dime of rent. In the weeks that followed, the house filled up with the paperwork of a life cut short. Ethan had left everything squared away just like he promised. Folders labeled in his blocky handwriting, accounts listed out, passwords sealed in a sleeve. He'd made dying about as easy on me as a thing like that can ever be. I wasn't ready to open most of it. But one folder sat thicker than the rest, and on the tab he'd written a single word. House, not our house. I stood there holding it and remembered something I'd spent years working hard not to think about. 7 years back, my parents had nearly lost their place out on County Road 12. Second mortgage, a balloon payment coming due, the whole grim math of 2 people who'd never once balanced a checkbook in their lives. And then, somehow, the whole crisis just vanished. Nobody ever explained how. I asked Trevor about it once, years later, and he waved me off with that lazy confidence of his. Don't stress about the house money, he'd said. That loan dies with him, not it. At the time I figured he meant our father, that Gerald had quietly shouldered something. Standing in my hallway with Ethan's folder in my hands, I started to realize I'd had the wrong him the whole time. I didn't open it that night. I set it on the kitchen table where Ethan used to do our taxes and left it there, squared neat to the edge. Everyone in my family assumed the math had died right along with him. But math doesn't die. It just waits, patiently, for somebody to open the file. My family rediscovered me about 9 days after the funeral, which is roughly how long it takes curiosity to outrun shame. My mother called, and her voice had gone soft and warm, the tone she saved for fundraising drives. She said she'd been giving me room to breathe. She said grief was sacred and she hadn't wanted to crowd me. Then, in the very same breath, smooth as flipping a turn signal, she asked how I was managing all of Ethan's affairs. Affairs, such a careful little word. Trevor texted that same afternoon, first time since the party. Hey Nora, been thinking about you, we should grab a coffee. My aunt mailed a card. The Bramwells, who couldn't spare a Saturday for a casket, suddenly had all the time in the world for a widow. It's a wild thing, how quickly people find an open slot in their calendar the second money's on the table. My mother got to the point the way she always did, by pretending she wasn't getting to any point at all. Did Ethan leave any instructions, sweetheart? About the house, the family things? She asked. We're still family shares. I told her I was still working through it, which was true, and that I'd let everyone know when I knew more, which was also true, just not in the way she was picturing. I hung up and looked at the house folder still sitting on the table, still squared to the edge, still unopened. Then I picked the phone back up and dialed the one number on Ethan's list I hadn't called yet. A law office. Those cream envelopes had come from somewhere. The story reached me before I ever reached the lawyer, because in a town the size of Millbrook, gossip moves a whole lot faster than grief. Aunt Diane had been busy. The version making the rounds at the church social hour was that poor Marlene had lost her daughter years ago, not to death, but to that husband. The one who'd filled my head with strange ideas about boundaries and turned me cold against my own blood. People I'd known since Sunday school looked at me in the food line with this soft, awful pity. The kind you save for someone who's been brainwashed. Ethan, the man who'd quietly put out my mother's financial fire and never once asked for a thank you, was getting rewritten as the villain who'd stolen me away. I didn't fight it. That's the thing my family never understood about me. You can't argue a person out of a story they enjoy telling. So I stayed quiet, I let them talk. And while they ran their mouths, I did the one thing I've ever been genuinely good at. I gathered the paper. I pulled every folder Ethan had labeled. I made copies. I built a timeline, dates lined up in a column, the same way I would for any case where somebody's lying and the truth is buried in the records. On top of the house folder sat that cream envelope, the twin of the ones from his solo appointments, still sealed, addressed in a careful hand. Marsh and Klein, attorneys at law, Millbrook. I'd been scared to open it. Grief turns careful people into cowards, but gossip has a way of curing fear. The next morning I called the office, and the woman who answered told me Mr. Bramwell, no, Mr. Colvin, had said I might. Vivian Marsh's office smelled like old paper and good coffee, and she had the kind of steady face that doesn't flinch at anybody's worst day. She'd known Ethan for 2 years, it turned out. He'd come to her the spring his scans went bad alone, on those afternoons I thought were follow-ups. He wanted this part clean for you, she said. He didn't want you handling it while you were still handling the other part. My throat did something complicated. She walked me through it slowly, in plain numbers, which I appreciated more than she could ever know. Ethan's estate, the life insurance, his slice of the consulting firm he'd helped build, the brokerage account he'd grown in patient silence over 11 years, all together came to a little over $1.65 million. Every bit of it left to me. Clean through a will and a living trust. No probate fight, no gray areas. He'd named me executor of the will and trustee of the trust, both. So there was nobody to settle his estate but me. I sat with that. I'd known Ethan was careful. I hadn't known he was that careful, that the quiet man who clipped coupons had been building me solid ground to stand on the entire time. I started to thank her to get up, to take my folder and go home and grieve a man I apparently hadn't fully known. Vivian didn't stand. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me the way you look at somebody right before you hand them something heavy. There's one more thing, Nora, she said. There's a note, and I think you'd better sit back down for this one. The note was 7 years old. 40-some pages, signed in 3 spots, recorded down at the county courthouse where these things turn real. When my parents nearly lost the place on County Road 12, the bank wouldn't move, and Trevor had nothing, and my father had even less. So Ethan stepped in. Quietly the way he did everything. He'd cut a check that covered the back payments, the balloon, and the lawyer's fees. $380,000, near enough. And he'd done it the right way, the careful way, the only way a forensic accountant's husband would ever do it. Not a gift. A loan. A promissory note, secured by a deed of trust against the house itself, with my parents' signatures on every single page. They kept their home because of him. And they'd told themselves and the whole family that it was just family helping family. The kind of thing that dissolves the second the helper dies. Ethan never forgave the balance, Vivian said. It's still owed. As of his death, that note isn't his anymore. It's an asset of his estate. And he named you executor and his only beneficiary. You administer the estate, and whatever it collects in the end, it collects for you. For me, I read the deed twice, then a third time, my hands perfectly steady because steadiness is what I have instead of falling apart. So the loan didn't die, I said. It just changed owners. Vivian nodded, slow. It changed owners, she said. Somewhere across town, my brother was telling folks the house money had died with Ethan. The 40-page document in front of me, signed and stamped and recorded, said different. Only one of us had it in writing. I took copies and drove home with the note on the passenger seat, right where Ethan used to set those cream envelopes. Over the next few days, the family's assumptions reached me secondhand, the way everything did. Trevor, it seemed, had plans. He'd run his mouth at the party I now knew the exact minute of, about how things were finally about to ease up for him. A cousin let it slip, not out of malice, just gossiping. Trevor was drowning. 2 trucks, a boat, a kitchen remodel he'd financed on pure optimism, and a private lender down in Savannah who'd stopped being charmed by him. And my mother's golden boy had a plan to fix all of it. He was going to lean on me, on Ethan's money, on what he kept calling, to anyone who'd listen, the family's share. When the cousin asked whether that was really Trevor's to count on, he laughed. "Relax," he said. "That loan dies with him. It was always a gift." A gift. I sat with that word for a long while. I knew exactly what the document called it because I'd read it 3 times with my own eyes. Trevor called it a gift. The deed of trust called it collateral. One of those words was just a story my brother liked telling. The other one was signed, witnessed, and recorded at the courthouse on the 15th of April, 7 years back. In my experience, when a story and a signature disagree, the signature wins. It just takes a while for everybody else to catch up. Vivian had handed me one more thing that first day, and I'd been too raw to read it. A letter, not stashed in some keepsake box. Ethan knew I'd never been sentimental about objects. Just 3 pages in his blocky hand, tucked in the front of the house folder where he knew I'd eventually look. I finally read it at the kitchen table, under the same light where he used to do our taxes. He'd written at the spring of the bad scans, clear-headed, no self-pity, the most Ethan thing I have ever held in my 2 hands. He told me he'd watched my family use me for 20 years and call it love. He listed it out gently, like line items. The loans I'd quietly covered. The holidays I'd hosted and paid for. The way Trevor's emergencies always somehow became mine. He said he'd never told me what to do about any of it because it wasn't his call to make. Then he wrote the thing I keep folded in my wallet to this day. "I'm not asking you for revenge, Nora. I left the note unforgiven on purpose, and I left the choice to you. Be kind, you always are, but stop paying for people who won't stand up for you. You're allowed to keep what you've earned." I read it maybe 10 times. He hadn't built a trap. That's the part that undid me. He hadn't rigged anything, hadn't slipped in some clever clause that would snap shut on my family the second they crossed a line. He'd simply declined to erase a debt, handed me the deed, and trusted me to be a grown-up about it. The trap, if there was one, was the one my family had been building for themselves, brick by brick, every single time they assumed I'd swallow the cost of being treated like I didn't matter. Ethan had just stopped paying their bill before he died. Now the bill had my name on it, along with a choice and a letter that ended on the word earned. There was a smaller cruelty tucked into the file, and Vivian walked me through it on my second visit. For years my parents had bragged, quietly the way the Bramwells brag, by mentioning it to absolutely everyone, that Ethan's life insurance named them. 380,000, they'd say. When Ethan passes, God forbid. They'd counted on it the way some people count on a lottery ticket as a settled fact. And it was almost true. Ethan had named them once, early on, back when he still believed they might earn it. They were beneficiaries, contingent beneficiaries, backups. Vivian could see I already understood. A contingent beneficiary only collects if the primary one is gone. "You're the primary, Nora," she said, "and you are very much alive." So the money my parents had spent in their imaginations a dozen times over had never, not for one single second, actually been theirs. It would only have reached them if I'd died first. As long as I was breathing, the policy paid me, and the backups stayed exactly that. Backups who never get called off the bench. They didn't know. That was the part that sat strangest with me. They'd been so certain, so casually entitled to a number they'd never once bothered to read the paperwork on. I think about that a lot now. How much of what my family believed they were owed was just a story nobody had ever checked. I'm a person who checks. It's the whole job, and every figure I checked told me the same quiet thing. They were never getting a cent Ethan hadn't decided on paper to give them. I want to be honest about something because this is the part people skip when they tell these stories. I almost forgave it, all of it. For about a week, I drafted a different version of myself in my head. The bigger person. The one who lets it slide, signs a release, forgives the whole balance, and holds on to what's left of a family because family's supposed to be worth more than money. I even told Vivian I was leaning that way. She didn't argue. She just said, "It's yours to forgive. Just make sure you're forgiving them and not training them." That sentence followed me all the way home. One night I opened the party photos again, the way you press on a bruise. This time I zoomed in slow, face by face, the forensic habit I can't shut off. My mother, glass up, glowing. Trevor, mid-laugh, already spending money that was never his. Aunt Diane, the cousins. And there, at the back edge of the frame, half in shadow, my father, Gerald. Everyone in that picture was beaming except him. He stood a little apart, hands at his sides, staring at the cake like a man who'd wandered into the wrong funeral. I looked at that for a long time. Then I looked at the timestamp again, the one I couldn't unsee. 2:07 p.m. While I was lowering Ethan into the ground, my whole family was raising a glass, and the only one of them decent enough not to enjoy it still hadn't found the spine to drive 20 minutes and stand next to me. I closed the laptop. I'd stopped drafting the forgiving version of myself. Some debts, it turns out, you collect for the record. The pressure switched gears the second they figured out I wasn't going to fold. Sweet went straight to sharp. Marlene started calling in tears now, real-sounding ones, the kind she could turn on for a church fundraiser without missing a beat. "I don't know what's happened to you," she cried. "Would you really throw your own parents out on the street over money? Ethan's not even cold yet." Ethan's not even cold. From the woman who'd clinked her glass at 2:07. I held the phone away from my face, looked at the note sitting on my table, and reminded myself what was actually true. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice flat and even, "I haven't done anything. I'm reading the paperwork Ethan signed. That's all this is." That wasn't enough, of course. Nothing but full surrender ever satisfied her. So she brought in backup. Aunt Diane called to tell me I was ripping the family apart. An uncle left a voicemail quoting scripture about honoring your father and mother. A cousin sent me a whole paragraph about how Trevor was under a lot of stress and didn't need me piling on. Not one of them asked how I was holding up. Not one mentioned Ethan except as a balance somebody owed them. They'd skipped his funeral to save a party, and now they were circling me to save a debt, and they honestly couldn't see the string tying those two things together. I could. Connecting things is what I do. It's the whole job. So I set up one more meeting with Vivian. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted to send something official. Polite, on letterhead, the kind of document that doesn't need to raise its voice because the facts do all the lifting. Trevor turned up on my porch that Thursday, no warning, wearing the same easy grin that had gotten him out of every scrape for 45 years. He'd made the 20-minute drive from our parents' place and settled himself at my kitchen table like he covered the mortgage, eyes already taking inventory of the room, the appliances, Ethan's good watch sitting out on the counter. He opened warm. Family, healing, grief, all the correct words in the correct order. Then he got to it. He needed a little bridge, just short-term, just until he got his feet back under him. The lender down in Savannah was turning mean. "I already told him it was handled," Trevor said, and there it was, right out in the open. He'd promised some man in Savannah a slice of my husband's estate before my husband was even in the ground. He'd borrowed against my grief and treated it like a done deal. When I didn't leap up to grab the checkbook, the grin went cold. "Come on, Nora," he said, and the real Trevor stepped through the door. "You married into money. Sharing some of it back is the least you can do. It's family money." Ethan would have wanted the family looked after. I asked him quiet which family he had in mind. The one that came to the funeral or the one that came to the party. He didn't have an answer, so he did what he always did when he got backed into a corner. He got loud, told me I'd changed. Told me Ethan had poisoned me. Told me Mom had been right about me the whole time. Then he was gone, banging my screen door hard enough that it bounced twice on the frame. I sat in the quiet a while after that. I just watched my brother try to collect on a man he couldn't be bothered to bury. Whatever part of me was still trying to be the bigger person went ahead and died right about then. I picked up the phone, called Vivian, and told her to send the letters. She drafted it exactly how I asked. No heat, no jab, nothing anybody could screenshot and weep over. Just facts, the kind that don't blink. Per the estate of Ethan Colvin, The promissory note dated April 15th, secured by a deed of trust against the property on County Road 12. Principal balance $380,000 was now due and payable to the estate. The letter laid out 3 reasonable roads. They could repay the balance. They could refinance and pay the estate off. Or they could sell the house and settle out of the proceeds. Fair terms, a real timeline, my attorney's number for questions. It was the softest possible way to deliver a hard truth, and I made sure of that. Vivian printed 5 copies, one for each address, and slid them into envelopes. That's when I noticed the paper. Cream. Heavy, with a faint texture to it. The exact envelopes Ethan used to carry home from these offices on the afternoons I thought were scans. The paper that had ridden quietly on his passenger seat for a year was about to go out to my family, this time with my name behind it instead of his. I held one a second before it got sealed. There's a strange loop to how things circle back. Ethan had spent his last private months in this office, on this paper, building me a way out that never once made me raise my voice. All I had to do was let the envelopes talk. I gave Vivian the addresses off the top of my head. I'd grown up at one of them. I'd nearly watched it go to auction once too, except it was never really mine to lose. On paper, it had been Ethan's the whole time. People love to say money can't buy back time. Sure, but it can buy back a house. The one my parents only still had because Ethan signed for it. The letters landed on a Saturday, 2 weeks to the day after they'd picked cake over a casket. I know the timing because my phone told me, loud, all afternoon. It kicked off with Trevor, a run of texts that went from baffled to furious inside a minute. What is this? Is this a joke? Call me right now. Then the cousins. Then Aunt Diane, who had a whole lot to say about Christian charity coming from a woman who'd helped plan the cake. And then my mother, who didn't text. My mother called. 8 times. I let every one of them ring out, watched her name light up the screen and fade, light up and fade like a porch bulb about to burn out. I heard later, from the one cousin who still talked to me straight, how it went at the house on County Road 12. Marlene had opened her envelope at the kitchen table, read the first line, "Per the estate of Ethan Colvin," and gone white as paper. The cousin said her hands were shaking so bad she had to lay the page flat to get through it. The man they'd buried in gossip and skipped in real life had reached out from his own grave with one calm paragraph and 40 pages of signatures. And there was nothing in their entire arsenal of tears and stories that could argue with a deed recorded at the courthouse. On the 9th call, I finally answered. Before she could get a syllable out, I gave her the only sentence I had left. "Talk to my lawyer, Mom." Then I hung up, laid the phone face down, and made myself an actual cup of tea. That one I drank. They regrouped fast, the way people do when the soft approach flops and they need a bigger room. Marlene's next move came through my aunt, because my mother had decided, with the wounded dignity of a queen, that she would not beg. There was going to be a family dinner. Sunday at the house to clear the air and put this whole ugly business behind us. A reconciliation, Diane called it, in a voice that made it plenty clear reconciliation meant me tearing up the letters over pot roast. "Your family, Nora," she said. "We don't do lawyers in this family. We sit down and we work it out. You're tearing everybody apart over paperwork." Paperwork. 40 pages that saved their house shrunk down to paperwork. I nearly laughed. I knew exactly what Sunday was. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a venue. They were going to pack that dining room with relatives, Diane, the cousins, probably the uncle with all the opinions, maybe some neighbor my mother could rope in to witness how cruel I'd become. The play was old and obvious. Surround the difficult woman with enough faces and enough pot roast and enough talk about blood, and she'll cave. She'll do what she always does, swallow the cost so everybody else can be comfortable again. They were counting on the old Nora, the one who showed up, who fixed it, who paid. I saw the trap for exactly what it was. So I did the thing that surprised even me. I said yes. Told Diane I'd be there at 6. Then I hung up and went and built a folder. I spent Saturday night the way I'd spend any case the night before it mattered. At the kitchen table, under Ethan's light, I put the file together. Not to ambush anyone, I want to be clear on that, because it would have been easy to turn it into a weapon, and I didn't. I built it so that when the room got loud, I wouldn't have to. A clean copy of the promissory note. The recorded deed of trust, courthouse stamp and all. A one-page timeline, because a timeline is just what the truth looks like once you strip the emotion off it. Diagnosis. The date Ethan signed the note, 7 years back. The date he died. The date of the funeral. The date of the party, the same date. The date the letters went out, and two things that weren't legal documents at all. The screenshot, 207 glowing in the corner. And the guest book, the one I'd lifted off the brass stand. 3 signatures on a page built for hundreds. I opened it again to add it to the stack, and I caught something I'd missed in the fog of that awful day. Next to her own name, in small, careful nurse's handwriting, Rosalind had written 4 words. He was not alone. I sat with that a while. He was not alone because 3 people on this earth understood that showing up is the entire meaning of love, and not one of them shared my last name. I closed the book and set it on top of the folder, gentle, the way you close a door on a house full of sleeping people. I wasn't bringing anger to dinner. Anger's easy to wave off. I was bringing a folder. You can't cry your way out of a folder. I drove the 20 minutes out to County Road 12 on Sunday with the folder riding shotgun, in the spot that had held Ethan's envelopes, then the note, and now this. The house looked the same as it had my whole childhood. The porch Ethan had paid to keep over their heads, though nobody there had ever put it that way. There were more cars than I expected. Diane's sedan, the cousins' trucks, a neighbor's old Buick. A venue, just like I figured. Inside, the air was thick with pot roast and performance. My mother met me at the door with a hug that never quite made contact, all collarbone and cold cheek, murmuring how glad she was I came, how we were going to fix everything tonight. Trevor stood by the window with his arms folded, not drinking, jaw clenched, a man waiting to be handed something he'd already decided belonged to him. Aunt Diane arranged her face into sympathy. And my father, Gerald, hovered at the edge of the kitchen the same way he'd stood at the edge of that party photo, eyes on the floor, finding somewhere else to be every time I looked his direction. They'd set the table for 9. There was a place for me. Good plates out. My name practically painted on the chair. First time in years they'd set a spot for me. I stood in the doorway with my folder and finally, completely understood why. Marlene waited until the plates were full, because she'd always known people are easiest to manage with their mouths busy. Then she tapped her glass, soft, and gave her speech. She talked about family like it was a country she'd founded. She talked about Ethan, generously now, fondly, a good man taken too soon, God rest him. The same man she couldn't cross town to bury. She talked about how grief makes people do rash things, how lawyers only ever deepen a wound, how the Bramwells had always handled their own. And then, smooth as ever, she brought it home. So I think we're all agreed that this letter business was a mistake made in pain. Nora's going to call that attorney Monday and put a stop to it, and we're going to be a family again. She smiled at me down the length of the table, and every face turned my way. The whole jury she'd assembled, waiting for the old Nora to nod. I set my fork down. I set my folder on the table next to my plate, squared to the edge the way Ethan used to square his. I didn't raise my voice, I never do. I hear you, Mom, I said. Can I ask everybody one thing first before I decide anything? The room, expecting me to give in, said, of course, sweetheart, of course. They thought they'd already won. They just handed me the floor. I opened the folder. I didn't slide it across the table or wave it around. I just laid the deed where my mother could see the courthouse stamp. Trevor's been telling people the house money was a gift, I said, level as a ledger. That it died with Ethan. I want everyone to hear the truth because you're about to make decisions based on a story and the story's wrong. I touched the pages one at a time. 7 years ago, when this house was 4 weeks from auction, Ethan paid $380,000 to save it. Not a gift. A loan. Signed by Mom and Dad, both of them. Recorded at the county courthouse on the 15th of April. I read them the legal description of their own house off the deed of trust, lot and parcel, the way you'd read out a verdict. I watched it land. Ethan never forgave that balance, I said. He could have, he chose not to, and here's the part Trevor got wrong. I looked at my brother, who'd gone the color of the tablecloth. You keep saying the loan died with him. It didn't. A debt doesn't die with the lender, it belongs to his estate. Then I said the sentence I'd driven 20 minutes to say, and I said it gently, which somehow made it worse. And I'm his executor, his only heir. Whatever that estate collects, I decide. For a second, nobody moved. You could hear the clock over the stove, the same one that had ticked through my whole childhood. The story they'd lived inside for 7 years, family helps family, debts dissolve, Nora eats the cost, had just run headfirst into a recorded deed. And the deed didn't blink. The old Nora would have softened it, would have rushed to reassure them. I let it sit there instead, true and heavy, and I quietly closed the folder. My mother went off like a struck match. It happened fast, the charm peeling away like wet paint, and all of a sudden she was on her feet with her napkin balled up in her fist. How dare I after everything she'd done for me? The sacrifices, the prayers, the labor of raising an ungrateful child, and this was her thanks to be threatened with the street over money, with my husband barely in the ground. The tears came right on cue, fat and furious. "You'd do this to me," she cried to the room, to her jury. "You'd put your own mother out on the street for a man who's already dead." The relatives shifted in their seats. This was the show they'd come for. And here's where I need you to understand something about staying calm, because calm is not the same as weak, and my family had confused those two things my entire life. I didn't stand. I didn't match her volume. I waited until the sob ran out of breath. Then I answered the only way that was true. "No, Mom," I said. "I'm not putting you on the street. Ethan put a roof over your head 7 years ago. I'm just done paying for it." Trevor slammed his palm flat on the table, hard enough to jump the silverware. He called me cold. He called me a thief, which was a remarkable word coming from a man who'd promised to lend out money that was never his. He told me I'd regret this, that I'd end up alone, that family is all anybody has at the end. I looked at him a long moment. "I know exactly how alone I am," I said. 3 people came to find out. Nobody apologized. I want that on the record. In a room full of my own blood, with the truth laid out in signatures, not one of them said they were sorry. They just got louder. That's the tell with people like mine. When the lie runs out, they don't reach for the truth. They reach for volume. When volume failed, my mother went for the oldest blade she owned. She drew herself up, wiped her eyes with the back of a hand, and aimed for the soft spot she'd always been able to find. "You'll see," she said, low and curt, the same voice she'd used standing over my dying husband. "When all of this is over, when that man's money is gone, we'll still be here. We're your real family, Nora, not him." The room went quiet because even they knew that one was meant to draw blood. And it would have, once. The old Nora would have crumbled at real family, would have started apologizing, would have reached for a pen. Instead, I reached into the folder and took out the last thing in it. Not the deed. The guest book. I set it on the table and opened it to the only page with writing on it, then turned it so the room could see all that white space and those 3 lonely names. "Real family showed up," I said. 3 people did. A hospice nurse, his college roommate, and me. You were at a party. I touched Rosalind's small handwriting beside her name. He was not alone. Then I took out Ethan's letter and read them one line, the one I keep in my wallet. He wrote, "Be kind, but stop paying for people who won't stand up for you." I let that settle. 11 years was real enough to save this house, I said. It's real enough to take it back. Last, I laid the screenshot face up in the middle of the table, where the pot roast was going cold, and I didn't say a single word about it. I didn't have to. They all leaned in and saw it. The toast, the raised glasses, and down in the corner, in numbers not one of them could argue with, 2:07 p.m., the exact minute they'd picked. Nobody touched it. The clock over the stove kept ticking. And then, into all that silence, my father spoke. Gerald hadn't said one word the whole night. He'd sat at the end of the table with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the grain of the wood, the way he'd stood at the edge of that photo, the way he'd stood at the edge of everything his entire life. Now he cleared his throat and his voice came out cracked and old. "I went," he said. Everybody turned. "That Saturday I drove to the funeral home, parked way out back where you wouldn't spot the truck. I sat in the lot." He wouldn't look at me. "I sat there an hour, Nora, had my good jacket on. I just couldn't make myself walk in. Your mother was waiting on me at the hall and I—" He stopped. His chin was trembling. For 1 second something in my chest moved toward him, because here at last was a flicker of conscience in a room that had shown none. He was human. I'll give him that much. But I had buried my husband in front of 3 people while my father sat 60 feet away in a parking lot with his good jacket on, close enough to hear the hymns. So I didn't hand him the absolution he was fishing for. "You had an hour, Dad," I said, and I kept it soft because soft was sharper. "The doors were open the whole time, you just had to walk through them." He put his face in his hands. He didn't deny it. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family did all night, and it still wasn't enough, and we both knew it. I stood, gathered my folder, and left the guest book closed on the table a moment longer than I needed to. I told them the same 3 options the letter had laid out: repay, refinance, or sell and settle. Vivian would handle the timeline, and I would not be discussing it again, not over dinner and not anywhere else. My mother was crying for real now, the quiet kind that doesn't perform for anyone. Trevor had gone somewhere far behind his own eyes, already running the math on a boat he'd have to sell. Diane stared at her plate. I slid the screenshot back into the folder, but I left them the picture of it in their heads because some things you can't unsee, and 207 belonged to them now too. At the door I turned. I wanted one clean sentence to carry out with me, and I found it. "My lawyer will be in touch," I said. Then, because I'm my mother's daughter in exactly one way, I know how to land a closing line, I added, "Happy birthday again, Trevor." I drove the 20 minutes home with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off. For the first time in 16 months, the quiet in that car felt like it belonged to me. They took 6 weeks to decide, which is about how long it takes pride to lose to a courthouse calendar. In the end, my parents refinanced. 7 years of a rising market had done what it tends to do out here. The house was worth close to double what they'd borrowed against it, and the original mortgage was most of the way paid down. There was enough equity to pull $380,000 out and settle the estate in full. So that's what they did, signing at a title company across town in front of a notary I never met. They kept the roof. They just finally paid for it, which is all Ethan had ever quietly asked. Trevor didn't come out of it so gently. With no family share coming, his lender in Savannah stopped being patient. The boat went first, then one of the trucks. Then the half-finished kitchen got draped in plastic and abandoned. The talk around the church social hour rearranged itself the way talk does, and somehow I became the villain a little less and Trevor became the cautionary tale a little more. I didn't push that along. I didn't have to. People can do arithmetic once the numbers get loud enough. One night, months later, I opened my phone to clear out old screenshots, and there it was. The party photo. 207 glowing in the corner. The image that had moved into my house like a tenant who never paid a dime. I looked at it a moment, then I deleted it. I didn't need it anymore. I'd already collected what it was for. I went no contact with my mother and with Trevor, not out of rage. I was all out of rage. More like the way you finally close an account that's only ever been overdrawn. Gerald I left a door open for, a narrow one. He hasn't walked through it yet, but he stopped sitting in parking lots, and that's something. The estate stayed mine, all 1.65 million of it, and I did the one thing with it that felt like Ethan. I set up a fund at the hospice in his name, the kind that pays for nurses to sit through the night with people who'd otherwise be alone at 3 in the morning. Rosalind helped me design it. The guest book sits on the shelf in my front room now, next to the last good photo of Ethan. 3 names on a page built for hundreds. I used to think it looked like an accusation. Now I know what it actually was. A list. My real family, all of it in 3 lines of ink. None of them share my last name. Every one of them showed up.